Tonight, we're witnessing one of those extraordinary geopolitical chess moves that remind us how ruthless, calculated, and unapologetically strategic modern superpowers can be. China has just dropped what can only be described as a thunderbolt in the corridors of global trade diplomacy. Beijing has reportedly told Ottawa in no uncertain terms, "We'll drop those painful canola tariffs if Canada backs off on electric vehicle restrictions." Yes, you heard that right, a full-blown economic bargain, one that exposes the raw nerve of global power politics beneath all that polite diplomatic language. Let's cut through the fluff here. This isn't just about canola seeds or electric cars. This is about control, who dictates the terms of the new economic order. Canada's decision to restrict Chinese EV imports wasn't just a commercial policy. It was a signal that Ottawa wanted to align itself more firmly with Washington's growing anti-China trade strategy. But Beijing, master of leverage and long-term strategy, didn't lash out militarily, didn't threaten sanctions instead. It reached into its economic arsenal and pulled out something far sharper. Trade manipulation through incentive. You want to protect your EV industry. China says, fine, but your farmers will pay the price. Now, let's not forget what canola means to Canada. We're talking about billions in exports, thousands of jobs, and entire farming communities dependent on Chinese markets. In 2019, when China first slapped tariffs and restrictions on Canadian canola, the losses were staggering. Over $1 billion evaporated from the economy. Farmers suffered, politics trembled, so this time Beijing knows exactly where to twist the knife. It's not just a trade offer, it's political blackmail wrapped in economic diplomacy, and yet you've got to admire the audacity of it. China's move is bold, precise, and strategic, a move straight out of Sun Tzu's Use Art of War. They're not begging Canada to reconsider, they're baiting Canada to compromise. They're saying, you want relief for your farmers, then stop towing Washington's line on EV. It's as if Beijing is reminding Ottawa, you can't play both sides forever. And that right there is the chilling brilliance of the maneuver. But here's the kicker, it's not just Canada watching. Every Western government, every trading partner, every multinational corporation is now staring at this spectacle thinking, if China can use canola as leverage today, what will it use tomorrow? Lithium, microchips, rare earth minerals, the message from Beijing is crystal clear. Economic dependency is the new battlefield and trade is the weapon. Now imagine the conversations happening behind closed doors in Ottawa tonight. Ministers sweating over how to respond. Do they prioritize the livelihoods of farmers or the integrity of their alliance with the United States? Do they call Beijing's bluff or quietly seek a face-saving deal? Because make no mistake, whichever path they choose, China has already won half the game by forcing them to make that choice. This is the future of global diplomacy. Folks, no tanks, no missiles, no shouting matches at the UN, just surgical economic pressure designed to bend nations without ever firing a shot. China's message to Canada, and indeed to the world, is this: your markets are your weakness, and we own your leverage. So as the West debates ideals of free trade and fair competition, Beijing is out there writing its own rulebook, and tonight, Canada has just become the latest pawn in that story. Will Ottawa cave under pressure or stand firm and risk economic pain? That's the question the world is waiting to see answered. And I'll say this as plainly as possible, this isn't just about canola or EV. It's a moment of truth. It's about whether democracies have the courage to stand by their principles when money and markets are on the line. Because right now, China isn't just testing Canada's resolve, it's testing the West's backbone. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the uncomfortable reality of our time. Global power no longer wears uniforms, it wears trade deals. And tonight, China just reminded us who's playing that game better than anyone else. China's latest maneuver to link canola tariffs with Canada's electric vehicle policies is a striking display of economic intelligence and geopolitical awareness. At first glance, it might appear to be a routine trade negotiation, but beneath the surface, it reveals the sophistication of Beijing's strategy to use interdependent markets as instruments of influence. By offering to remove tariffs on Canadian canola, a key agricultural export, in exchange for leniency on electric vehicle import restrictions, China is effectively transforming commerce into a diplomatic weapon. It's a move that demonstrates how far Beijing is willing to go to protect its expanding industrial ambitions, while simultaneously tightening its grip on countries whose economies rely heavily on Chinese demand. The brilliance of this approach lies in its subtlety. Unlike conventional sanctions or overt retaliation, this is diplomacy wrapped in an economic incentive. It appeals to Canada's economic vulnerabilities while framing the proposal as a gesture of cooperation. On paper, it sounds like a win-win. Canada regains access to its most valuable agricultural market, and China maintains its position in the EV industry without direct confrontation. But in reality, it's a calculated act of leverage, the kind of maneuver that forces political decisions through economic dependency. China is exploiting the fact that Canada's canola industry cannot easily find alternative markets of comparable scale, and at the same time, Beijing knows that Canadian policymakers are under pressure from both domestic farmers and Western allies. This tactic aligns perfectly with China's broader trade playbook, which thrives on asymmetric power relationships. Beijing understands that when nations become reliant on its markets, it can dictate terms with minimal resistance. The canola EV linkage serves as a quiet reminder to Ottawa that China's economic influence extends well beyond manufacturing and into the most unexpected sectors. By connecting agriculture with electric vehicles, China is demonstrating how it can merge unrelated industries to maximize bargaining power. It's not simply about economic gain, it's about reshaping the rules of engagement in global trade. This type of cross-sector leverage is a hallmark of China's statecraft, complex, multi-dimensional, and designed to make other nations realize that no single policy decision comes without cost. For Beijing, the timing of this move couldn't be more deliberate. The global race for EV dominance is intensifying, and Western countries, including Canada, have been tightening regulations on Chinese-made vehicles to protect domestic industries. By turning agricultural access into a bargaining chip, China is signaling that any attempt to exclude it from lucrative Western markets will have repercussions in other areas. It's a statement that no sector is off-limits when defending its strategic industries. Moreover, it positions Beijing as a player willing to use incentives rather than threats, which, from a public diplomacy perspective, paints China as the reasonable actor while subtly pressuring Canada into economic submission. For Ottawa, this offer creates a dangerous temptation. Accepting it could ease the financial strain on Canadian farmers and calm political discontent in rural areas. But it would also set a precedent that China can achieve its political goals through targeted economic manipulation. It's a test of whether Canada prioritizes short-term economic relief or long-term strategic autonomy. Meanwhile, for China, even if Ottawa resists, the offer itself achieves a psychological victory. It forces Canada to acknowledge its economic vulnerability and highlights Beijing's ability to dictate the terms of engagement. This calculated use of economic interdependence marks a defining moment in how global power is exercised today. It's no longer about imposing dominance through force. It's about mastering the art of leverage, identifying where a rival depends on you, and turning that dependency into quiet control. China's Canola for EV proposal is a textbook case of modern economic statecraft, a reminder that in the 21st century, the most powerful weapons are not missiles or armies, but markets and trade policies used with surgical precision. China's decision to intertwine its canola tariffs with Canada's electric vehicle restrictions marks one of the most sophisticated displays of economic statecraft in recent memory. It's a move that reveals not only Beijing's strategic patience, but also its mastery of manipulating interdependencies within global markets to pursue political advantage. On the surface, this offer appears transactional, a gesture of goodwill aimed at repairing strained trade ties. Yet beneath the veneer of pragmatism lies a deeply calculated act of leverage designed to remind Ottawa that no policy decision involving China exists in isolation. The proposition to lift tariffs on Canadian canola in exchange for a softer stance on Chinese EV exposes how Beijing uses economic tools to bend diplomatic narratives in its favor, carefully balancing punishment with persuasion. For China, the logic is elegantly ruthless. Canada's agricultural exports, particularly canola, are vital to its rural economy and political stability. When Beijing imposed restrictions on Canadian canola back in 2019, the impact was immediate and painful: billions in losses, farmers in uproar, and mounting political pressure on Ottawa to resolve the standoff. That memory still lingers, making China's latest offer all the more potent. It plays directly into Canada's most sensitive economic nerve, reminding policymakers how easily one nation's prosperity can be disrupted by another's trade decisions. Beijing understands that by dangling relief to farmers while demanding policy concessions in the high-tech EV sector, it forces Canada into a corner where domestic economic needs and geopolitical loyalties collide. This is not coercion in the traditional sense. It's a subtler, more intelligent form of pressure, one that frames economic manipulation as cooperation. By presenting its demand as a compromise, China avoids the optics of aggression while achieving the same result as a hardline threat. It's a strategy that suits Beijing's image as a rational global power, one that prefers deals over disputes but never without extracting something significant in return. The offer becomes a test of political will, measuring how far Ottawa is willing to defend its principles of trade fairness and national sovereignty when real livelihoods are at stake. What makes this tactic so striking is the way it bridges two unrelated industries to form a single point of negotiation. Canola and electric vehicles share no direct connection, yet China's decision to link them creates a web of interdependence that traps Canada in a moral and economic dilemma. If Ottawa holds firm on EV restrictions, it risks renewed pain for its farmers. If it accepts China's terms, it signals that its trade policies are negotiable under pressure. Either way, Beijing secures influence. It's a demonstration of how modern power operates, not through overt domination, but through calculated manipulation of global supply chains and market dependencies. Beijing's message is unmistakable. Countries that seek to limit Chinese industries will face consequences in sectors they never thought were vulnerable. This is the essence of China's new geopolitical playbook: quiet, methodical, and devastatingly effective. While Western leaders often speak of decoupling from Chinese markets, the truth is that many of their economies remain deeply entangled. By using agricultural trade as leverage against high-tech restrictions, China underscores that no country can disentangle its prosperity from its reach without real sacrifice. Canada's response will reveal more than just its trade priorities. It will expose whether Western nations truly have the resilience to resist economic coercion when it's masked as diplomacy. China has once again demonstrated its ability to weaponize interdependence while maintaining a facade of fairness. Its offer to drop canola tariffs is not a concession, it's a calculated move in a much larger game, one that defines the future of global power, the quiet domination of others through the flawless execution of economic leverage. Canada now finds itself at a defining crossroads, caught between two forces that could shape its economic and political future for years to come. On one side is the domestic pressure to protect its farmers and preserve a vital agricultural industry. On the other is the strategic imperative to uphold its alignment with Western allies who are increasingly wary of Chinese influence. Beijing's offer to remove the canola tariffs in exchange for easing restrictions on Chinese electric vehicles places Ottawa in a deeply uncomfortable position. It is not just a policy dilemma, it is a test of resolve, principle, and diplomatic finesse. The government must now decide whether to prioritize the immediate relief of its farmers or to safeguard its long-term commitment to an international coalition resisting China's expanding economic dominance. The complexity of this decision lies in its dual nature. Economically, Canada has much to gain from a restoration of unrestricted canola trade with China. The agricultural sector, particularly in provinces like Saskatchewan and Manitoba, depends heavily on the Chinese market, which consumes billions of dollars worth of Canadian exports each year. A removal of tariffs would instantly rejuvenate rural economies, stabilize incomes, and ease the political discontent that has been building among farmers since the initial restrictions. Yet the price of that relief is steep. Accepting China's conditions could undermine Canada's credibility as a nation committed to fair competition and transparent trade practices. It could signal that Canada's policies are negotiable, not based on principles but on economic pressure. Politically, the stakes are even higher. Canada's relationship with the United States remains the cornerstone of its foreign and economic policy, and any move that appears to favor Beijing over Washington could have repercussions far beyond trade. The U.S. has made no secret of its concerns about China's aggressive push into the EV market, which it sees as a direct challenge to Western manufacturing and energy independence. If Ottawa were to soften its stance under Chinese pressure, it could risk alienating its closest ally and damaging its reputation within NATO and the broader Western Bloc. In essence, Canada's domestic decision has global consequences. It could either reaffirm or weaken the Western effort to push back against Beijing's growing technological and industrial influence. For Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government, the timing could not be worse. Inflation pressures, high living costs, and economic uncertainty have already eroded public confidence. A trade breakthrough with China could provide a much-needed economic boost, but at the risk of accusations that Ottawa is capitulating to foreign pressure. Conversely, standing firm on EV restrictions could win moral support abroad but deepen the financial pain at home. This balancing act reflects the deeper struggle of middle powers in today's polarized world, how to assert independence while remaining tethered to larger geopolitical forces. Behind the scenes, Canadian policymakers are likely weighing the potential fallout of every possible outcome. A quiet compromise might save face domestically, but China's strategy ensures there will be no easy exit. The very act of considering the proposal reinforces Beijing's influence, demonstrating that Canada's economic decisions are now shaped by external pressure rather than internal priorities. The government's response will therefore define not just the future of trade with China, but also its global image as a nation capable of resisting coercion. The challenge for Canada is to craft a response that satisfies both its economic realities and its moral commitments, an increasingly rare equilibrium in global politics. Every option carries risk. Capitulation would weaken sovereignty, defiance would invite economic pain, and hesitation could erode confidence from both allies and citizens. China has effectively maneuvered Ottawa into a position where every decision carries consequences. What Canada chooses next will reveal whether it is still steering its own course in global affairs or being steered by the currents of power it cannot control. China's latest move to link canola tariffs with Canada's electric vehicle restrictions is not an isolated gesture. It revives a painful memory deeply etched into the Canadian economy, the 2019 canola crisis. That moment served as a stark lesson in how economic dependency can be turned into a weapon, and it appears Beijing has not forgotten just how effective that strategy was. When China abruptly blocked imports of Canadian canola seeds 6 years ago, citing alleged contamination issues, the repercussions were immediate and severe. Over $1 billion in export value evaporated almost overnight. Thousands of farmers faced financial distress, and Ottawa found itself scrambling for diplomatic solutions that never fully materialized. The message was unmistakable then, and it echoes even louder now. China knows exactly where Canada is vulnerable and how to use that vulnerability to apply pressure without ever firing a shot. The agricultural heartland of Canada bore the brunt of the 2019 shock. Provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta, where canola farming is central to the economy, witnessed plummeting crop prices and overflowing silos as shipments to China dried up. For many farmers, it was not just an economic blow but a psychological one, a reminder that their livelihoods could be undermined by political tensions beyond their control. Beijing's reasoning for the ban may have been technical on paper, but the timing coincided perfectly with diplomatic strains between the two nations following the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver. It was a demonstration of how trade could be used as an instrument of retaliation, precise and devastating. The current scenario carries the same undertone of calibrated pressure, but this time China has wrapped it in the language of negotiation rather than outright confrontation. By proposing to remove canola tariffs if Canada backs down on EV restrictions, Beijing is effectively reopening that old wound while pretending to offer the cure. It's a move that reasserts dominance while disguising it as compromise. For Canada's agricultural community, the offer will undoubtedly sound appealing. Years of uncertainty have left farmers eager for stability, and the promise of regaining unrestricted access to China's vast market is an opportunity many can't ignore. Yet beneath that surface lies the same strategic manipulation that crippled the industry before. Beijing is reminding Ottawa that it controls access to the most profitable destination for Canadian crops, and it can restore or revoke that privilege at will depending on Canada's political posture. The deeper implication is that China has institutionalized the playbook it tested in 2019. It learned that targeting Canada's agricultural exports triggers domestic unrest, which in turn pressures the government to seek reconciliation. The canola crisis proved that farmers, while not directly part of foreign policy, can become powerful political catalysts when economic pain hits home. By exploiting that internal pressure point again, China is betting that Ottawa will find it harder to maintain its stance on EV under growing domestic criticism. In essence, Beijing has weaponized memory. It knows that the fear of reliving 2019 is often more powerful than the event itself. For Canada, the challenge is to break free from this recurring cycle of dependence and reaction. Every time Beijing uses canola as leverage, it deepens the perception that Canada's economic resilience can be compromised through targeted trade measures. The ghost of the 2019 crisis lingers over every negotiation table, shaping how policymakers and farmers alike interpret China's intentions. Beijing's latest offer is not an olive branch. It's a test to see whether Ottawa has learned from the past or remains captive to it. The shadow of that earlier confrontation looms large, serving as both a warning and a reminder that in global politics, lessons ignored are often repeated with greater consequence. China's proposal to Canada, tying the removal of canola tariffs to concessions on electric vehicle restrictions, has reverberated far beyond Ottawa's political circles. It has sent a clear, unmistakable signal to Western capitals that Beijing is now operating on a new level of economic and diplomatic sophistication. What might appear as a bilateral trade negotiation is, in reality, a global message, a demonstration of how China intends to counter collective Western efforts to contain its industrial expansion. The move exposes the growing asymmetry between China's calculated, multi-layered economic tactics and the fragmented, often reactive approach of Western governments. It underscores that Beijing has not only mastered the art of economic statecraft, but has also learned how to exploit the divisions and vulnerabilities within the Western alliance itself. To Washington, Brussels, London, and other Western centers of power, this development serves as both a warning and a preview. The warning is clear: Beijing can and will use its vast market access as leverage to undermine coordinated policies against it. The preview shows what this new global order might look like, one where China uses targeted economic incentives to weaken unity among its critics. When China extends an offer like this to Canada, it's not only addressing Ottawa, but also speaking to every Western government that has tried to challenge its dominance in industries such as technology, renewable energy, and automotive manufacturing. It's saying, in effect, that resistance carries a price and cooperation brings reward. This binary choice forces governments to decide whether their allegiance to Western economic unity outweighs the domestic benefits of accommodating Beijing. China's economic diplomacy has evolved into a powerful form of psychological warfare. Instead of direct confrontation, it creates moral and strategic dilemmas for its opponents, pushing them to question their own alliances. The Canola EV exchange exemplifies how Beijing can reach deep into the political fabric of another country and turn its own internal interests against its foreign policy commitments. Western governments pride themselves on policy coordination, yet China's targeted offers can unravel that unity piece by piece. Each nation has its pressure points. For Canada, it's agriculture. For Germany, it's the auto industry. For Australia, it was mining and wine. China studies these dependencies with meticulous precision and then designs its tactics to exploit them. It's a strategy that doesn't require aggression. It thrives on the power of choice, a choice that is never truly free. This episode also highlights how far the balance of economic power has shifted. In the past, Western economies dictated the terms of global trade, setting the rules through institutions like the World Trade Organization. Today, China has rewritten those rules, not on paper, but through influence, scale, and control of critical supply chains. Whether it's lithium for EV batteries, rare earth elements for electronics, or agricultural imports that sustain entire industries, Beijing's leverage is embedded in the structure of global commerce. Its message to the West is that decoupling is an illusion. Every attempt to isolate China will be met with calculated countermeasures that expose how intertwined the global economy truly is. For policymakers in the United States and Europe, China's handling of Canada offers a cautionary tale about what economic dependence really means in practice. It's no longer enough to talk about diversification or resilience. Western nations must now confront the uncomfortable reality that China can use trade as a diplomatic scalpel, cutting through alliances with precision. Each country's willingness to resist or yield becomes a test of the West's collective resolve. The Canola gambit shows that Beijing doesn't just want access to markets. It wants to redefine how economic influence translates into political power. And with each strategic offer, each quiet compromise, it inches closer to reshaping the balance of global authority in its favor.